Hey, what's up, guys? So for today, I want to review like some of the hands from Mario Monkey's presentations. There were like a couple of interesting hands that we went through in his meeting. I posted the video over here, uh, and the thing is, we didn't go through any of it in solvers, which is, it's okay. But I also wanted to get some conclusions on some of them because, there was quite a few interesting spots. But one thing I noticed was that every single hand marked was a hand he won. And so, I kind of repeat myself, but whenever someone goes through marked hands, they tend to be very biased. And so in this sample, we saw only winning hands, and that might be something about the way that Mario Monkey marks his hands. Like, I would encourage Bartek to mark some hands where he loses also. Just, it doesn't really matter if it's a winning or losing hand as much as how interesting it is. But yeah, anyways, there were like a lot of interesting hands, and I think it would have just been so much better in some spots to explain them through a solver. And a lot of you guys are kind of scared to use a solver because you think it will take too much time or something. I don't know. Or like it's not your style or whatever type of stuff you say. But I think that, the more you do this, the faster you get, basically. And also the better you get at recognizing what the solve is trying to tell you. And I haven't actually, so I just solved these, right? I ran the solutions through Simple already. I haven't really looked through them yet, so we're just going to see what the solver output shows. Although I did do a few things. Firstly, I want to look at the King 6-4 hand. So this is yeah, like he had King 8, and then it was pretty interesting because it was against a fish, and against fish, obviously, it's tough to put them on ranges, basically. He ended up with 9-8 offsuit, if I'm correct. Maybe, which obviously should never be in his min-raising range. I mean, he is 23 big blinds deep, so it's not the worst to min-raise 9-8 offsuit if the stacks were effective. But the fact that Zeli Papa is only 12 big blinds deep, it makes it, a lot worse of a min-raise. Anyways, yeah, so it's basically very hard to put fish on ranges. I mean, so far, his button stats are like, they're honestly nothing terrible looking at this, like 50 VPIP. He hasn't limped yet. He's only min-raising or open shoving. So far, it's a small sample. I can't say he's, opening way too much yet, at least. As for his post-flop stats, like, he looks a bit weak. Big blind versus button, at least. And I don't see his button stats. It probably... Oh, they're over here, actually. So, yeah, it's basically a very limited sample, and basically the sample doesn't matter too much. But the way so, like, using GTO as some type of baseline, even against weak fish, can't be that bad, but I did run some more exploitative sims as well, like I totally changed his pre-flop ranges and everything. So anyways, the way the hand went is basically, if I'm, like, the flop, so we called pre-flop, which is probably fine, and then, well, actually it is strictly fine, but I guess firstly I could show you what the ranges should be like. So button is raising, right? And as we see, at 25 big blinds deep, we should be calling every king basically, and we should be 3-betting non-all-in with some of them, you know, as a bluff sometimes. Hands like Jack-7 offsuit can also work. Or bottom of our calling range we can basically 3-bet non-all-in with. But if we're deep, then obviously like calling every single king is totally fine. Now at 10 big blinds, as we see, King-8 is really the margin. So we were talking about that in the video a bit. King-8 off is like basically super borderline. You have to be folding a ton of these suited hands as well, like 10-2, like even 10-6 suited is folding. And we were at 12 big blinds effective here. So as we see now, King-8 becomes a clear call, and we're not folding as many suited hands, but we should still be folding some of the worst ones, like, you know, 9-4 suited and 7-2 suited and stuff. But since we're against a fish, I wouldn't mind maybe opening our range, especially since he's probably opening wider as if he was on 25 big blinds, but we are still shallow, so I wouldn't mind playing something more like this, you know, like calling every suited hand, but still folding like King-5 off or something. But I think this is something around how we should be playing, basically. Maybe we could even like flat aces or something, but yeah, as we see, like there's a huge difference, and a lot of people are overcalling here, and you know, that's why I was saying in the video too, like, I don't know, I might not be opening King-5 or King-4 suited at 10 big blinds deep, personally. Anyways, so the way the action went, I think, is that this DZ Power guy, he min-bet the flop, which is a totally reasonable play, right? Like, it's definitely some kind of a thinking fish, because, like, throughout the hand we saw uh, he had some idea of what he was doing. Like, he didn't open a terrible hand, and his raise on the river, while it was definitely not great, he was attacking a spot where we bet small, so, like, he's definitely thinking in some way, but I guess we didn't have any thoughts on that we didn't have any info on that he was thinking at all. But yeah, he does bet the min bet on the flop, and we decide to call. So the way that it goes is we call, and then the turn goes check check, and on the river Maori Monkey decides to bet small rather than jam, in a spot where I said that, like, I would always be jamming, because that's how much equity I view our king as having in this spot. I view our king as being basically pretty much the nuts here. Like, I don't think anybody is ever going to slow play, let's say, a better king on the turn, especially not this deep. And I don't think that they're going to be, you know, like checking like 7-8 or something. And yeah, they do have some misdraws, but at the same time, like, I think they should maybe be bluff catching if they ever hit a queen or something, which I think is in their range. So I just thought it is kind of like the way to play balanced. However, I totally understand the exploitative way to play. Like, this allows him to kind of spaz. It also allows him to like hero call more with, let's say, ace high and stuff. So I totally understand this bet too. But yeah, that was the action, and let's see what happens. So basically, he's supposed to, like, this is GTO at 12 big blinds, no adjustments. He's supposed to be betting 100% of the time with his entire range, min bet. I'm not sure if the fish is doing that or not, but, you know, a lot of regs will do that for sure. And so I like I don't think we need to change much, and I think just continuing like that will be fine. This is how we should be reacting to the min bet. As you see, we kind of need to be kind of honest. Basically, all of our weak suited hands are going to connect with these two low cards in some way. So we can just be calling them. And we should have a raising range, and the raising range should definitely be consisting of a lot of kings. However, notice that King 8 is mostly going to be calling. Fact is that king 8 and king 7 are two of our weakest kings, along with, let's say, king 5, king 3. King 2 here is raising, I guess, I don't know, it's just some kind of a bluff. It's a bit of an anomaly that GTO would do sometimes. It's basically, this king 2 is actually raising to deny equity, because it doesn't mind as much if it folds out worse. Because basically the thing is, when you raise here with a hand like king 8, which we see GTO is never doing pretty much, we're not achieving very much at all, because we're going to fold out, better hands. I mean, we're going to fold out worse hands that have zero equity against our hand pretty much, and we're going to have hands that beat us just continuing in some way, like they're going to re-raise and we can't really fold, or they're going to like trap or something. So there's really not much purpose to raising king 8 against at least someone who opens a GTO range, because even if he c-bets 100% of the time, his range is just that strong. It's really dominating us, and he has the right to c-bet 100%. And so our value region will really be king 9 plus. And one thing is that since we're so shallow, also I thought we might be check raising more with two pairs, but it's important to notice that we're not. Excuse me. We're actually just going to check call, because we're so shallow. So as we see, the stack to pot ratio is so small. Sorry, need to withhold this sneeze. So anyways, the stack to pot ratio is so small that even if the turn checks through, we're going to be able to jam. As we saw, I said it was an option. It would only be a slight overbet on the river. So check calling with two pairs. We should be check calling with all two pairs, basically. Maybe if I did this and I got rid of the rounding, it would be different, and it would check raise like some 6-4. No, it's still calling 100%. So basically, like always check call out two pairs. But for our raises, we should be raising king 9 and better, and then king 8 and king 7. So king 8 and king 7, as we see, we're only raising with a flush draw. So the flush draw basically adds a ton of equity to the hand, and it makes it like king 7 suited, let's say, is about the same strength as king 9 offsuit. King 7 of spades, I mean. So that's why it would raise. And then it would obviously mix in a few decent bluffs, since we are raising a decent amount here. We do have a lot, well, not a lot, but we've got a decent amount of kings in our range, so we need to mix in a few bluffs, They are, they're generally going to be consisting of flush draws, right? So, backdoor flush draws with a 5 are very good. Backdoor flush draws with a 7, especially if they're queen or jack high, look very good. Otherwise, if we have a pair, we're not gonna raise. We're just gonna check call. But yeah, that's basically how we play. So king 8, decent call. And all right. So what's interesting here is that on this turn, GTO would be donking a amazingly much higher amount than I thought. Actually, it would basically be donking like 55% of its hands, as we see, and that's much more than I expected. It might be that since we are so shallow, we the SPR is so low that I don't know, we're so shallow that we're going to be able to donk with a small sizing usually. Like, we're never going over half pot. We're either using quarter size or like half pot. I mean, it is sometimes going with a full pot size bet, but that's actually very rare. So yeah, it's pretty interesting that it's going to be donking about 45% of the time, and it's donking like most of its top pairs, actually, like hands like you know, king jack, king 9, king 8, they're going to be donking with a small sizing very often. And I guess it's also important to note that hands like 10-7, 9-7 with a flush draw are also going to be donking quite often and with a big size. So yeah, that's certainly going to change things quite a bit, especially since I don't think people are doing it much in reality, and especially since we didn't do it ourselves. I guess one of the big reasons why GTO is donking is because after we check call on the flop, if we look at his range of hands on the flop, and he's c-betting everything, right? So his range should have a lot of hands like, pocket eights through pocket queens, basically. And it's going to have a lot of stuff like, these open-enders now, queen eight, like these are gut shots. And actually, it means we want to be getting a lot of value. Like some of the, like a lot of these hands are going to be in very tough spots if we donk. Like his kings are obviously going to be totally fine, but his kings actually don't make up the majority of his range here. The majority of his range is going to be consisting of hands such as, ace high or like some kind of draw or like under pairs. And so donking makes a ton of sense in this situation because of the range that we're targeting actually. So especially when we may not expect him to be barreling at a super high frequency on this turn with all of those hands, basically. And so it does definitely make a lot of sense to be donking. Anyways, we do check, and as we see, like 9-8 isn't really in his pre-flop range, so it doesn't matter, but as we see, he's supposed to be bluffing with, a bunch of hands, like 10-9, even though it has zero equity. It's supposed to just keep barreling quite often. Ace-X at this shallow stack depth do have more than enough equity to check back. He should be barreling with every king, pretty much. He can, check back a tiny bit with like king 9. Maybe with the 9 of spades, since, I don't know, that's blocking more of our draws, I guess, or something. But yeah, like, he should be checking back hands like queens, jacks, and tens. Probably some people are going to be overbarreling. So I think on this turn is a major turning point from where people play in reality, basically. So we can come back to this turn and look at how people might actually play on the turn. But for now, let's just keep going through this in GTO. See how things turn out. But on the river, the queen comes, and as we see, after the turn goes check, check, we really don't have much like king 8 in our range. It looks like we're actually going to go for a check raise here, which is like we have one combo of king 8, which is pretty much nothing. But basically, otherwise, our sizing here is generally the most common sizing will be all in. It's what's remaining in our stack. There could be like there's going to be some pot size bets, although the difference between pot and all in isn't so big in this situation between what his calling range should be, and there's going to be a very minuscule percentage of like block bets with like queen jack, but usually you can even just check queen jack in order to bluff catch. But as we see, the all-in sizing, once his range is so capped, we saw that villain's range on the turn should be consisting of tons of hands like jack jack 10-10, some hands like ace queen, I mean queens is there too, queen 8, queen 7, queen 5. So queens are really one of those combos that are not going to be barreling. And then jacks, 10s are going to be some hands that can like bluff catch, basically. So we want to put those hands under pressure and make them kind of indifferent to calling. And that's why all in basically is one of the sizings that makes the most sense, at least from a theoretical perspective. And as we see, he's supposed to call every king, and he's supposed to call a lot of queens. Like he's supposed to call queen 8 and queen 7 since they block the straight, and ace queen and, you know, jacks, 10s, and 9s are going to be very close, basically, between calls and folds. So he's supposed to be folding every ace, and if they even call a few aces or like a few underpairs, which they shouldn't really have in their range, then our jam is going to be making a lot of money in terms of value, and it's also going to be good sizing to go with as a bluff, like with hands like, you know, 10-9 or like missed flush draws, basically, which we shouldn't have too many of. 8-4 as well makes a lot of sense because that's a hand which, you know, it's blocking. It's like bottom pair. We have pretty much zero showdown value. Now, what I want to do here is, you know, I think a lot of people are just not going to be donking at this frequency. So I want to see what happens when this happens. So I can like edit this, and we can make player 1, who is out of position, check his entire range here. I think in reality we will have some donks, but definitely it's gonna have, you know, less than 45%. So I think it's gonna be closer to 0% donks than like 45% donks. So I think this will still be kind of more realistic, and it's going to mean that button should also be barreling less in general, since now we've got so much less value. So we're donking 100%, and as we see now, button should be checking pretty much 100% of his range. But because if we check 100% of our range, button should be checking 100% of his range, because we just stop donking all of our values. So our checking range becomes so much stronger, and it actually doesn't really make sense for us to be barreling here. Now, I think in reality, again, people are going to be barreling still a lot of their kings, but anyways, let's, so like over here, we see that button is going to be protecting his check back range. So let's see if that changes something on the river. So now we're on the river, and because button is protecting his check back range, we see that it's again splitting between a block bet and a jam, which makes a lot of sense. Like, we should be splitting between a block bet and a jam, because, you know, hands like the block bets are going to be the green, and the jams will be in red. And as we see, hands that make sense to jam will be obviously some straights. We don't really have many sets. We jam them pre-flop. Overpairs like pocket aces do make sense here to jam. I think it's pretty realistic to be calling aces, even against fish at this stack depth. And also they make pretty decent bluffs, right? Like, especially like ace 7, like we're bluffing a ton actually. And basically whenever we have pure air, because we have pure air, we're just going to be bluffing. And some of the best pure air bluffs will be hands that have a 7. So ace 7, 7, 7, 3 is nuts. But like, yeah, if we have a 7, well, actually, pretty much any air. We don't have very much air, so you want to split between jams and block bets. And here, because the button was so careful with his check back range on the turn, our equity isn't like super high. Our equity overall, as we see with King 8, is just below 80% in general. And 80% is kind of the, if I look through solvers in general, 80% equity is kind of the pivot number between like overbet and like smaller normal size bet. So we certainly have enough value to be betting, but it's not enough to be jamming. However, King Jack and well, king 10, but not king jack here. These have 85 or more % equity, and so they have enough value to just be jamming. Let's look at a straight here that has enough equity to be like 99% equity. So, you know, that's got enough equity to be jamming, although you might want to also check like 8-7 because like you need to know which combos to bet and check. In reality, I think we could, you know, do no rounding and it would be much more mixed. Like 8-7 would bet sometimes. Like king jack might not use different sizings, stuff like that. But I'm gonna keep it unrounded for now. Now, the reason why we're not jamming so much is because he didn't cap his range so much. So what I thought was that in reality, he would be capping his range a ton. So, all right, let's get rid of that. So I thought that he would be barreling some amount. I'm not even sure what number he'll barrel, but since there's already a few bets here, I'm just going to pick that. And I'm just going to say he's going to barrel all the time with aces, kings, and straight, and king queen and king jack. And maybe he'll check back the worse ones. And I think that's reasonable. Maybe king 5 as well, and yeah, king 6. So, and he's going to keep bluffing a bit with these combos. And you know, in reality, I think people will be barreling even more, basically, with some of these bluffs, right? I mean, with king x. And whether they keep barreling with air or not, I'm really not sure. We can add one combo of bluffs as well. Why not? And now we have to calculate the turn again, because we kind of changed things. So now we locked both in position and out of positions range. And we're on the river now, so, you know, now it went check, check, and we're on the river. And now we see all of a sudden that we're using much more different sizings. We were previously using like more small sizings. We were using like, you know, 20% or more of like a block bet and less than 20% of jams. Now it's kind of the opposite way around, but because he kind of capped his range, we can start betting more. What's interesting is that king 8 still, it gained a lot of equity. So the EV difference between, you know, betting all in and betting small, it's pretty much 0. So you can, and checking as well. So again, it's one of these hands you can really do anything with. But basically you notice that we can jam with a whole lot more of our entire range in general, just because it makes more sense. However, it might rather do that with straights in general, and make stronger hands. But yeah, you kind of get the point. Like the more he caps his range, the more we can start like just jamming. And I think like if I did this right here and I made him mega cap his range by pretty much like, this is extremely exploitable. What I'm doing here is I'm making him always barrel with worse hands, and maybe I'll make him like, yeah, I'll make him also barrel his like 8s, 7s, 9s, because I just, this guy might be scared and he wants to like deny equity with those combos or something. Maybe he'll still check back some 10s. So, you know, this is getting extremely exploitable in cap now. But I think a lot of weak players will still play something like this. And so they capped the range even more. And now, as we see, all of a sudden, the only bet sizing that we would use is all in. And we would actually go all in with a ton of our range. Basically, every king, because he capped his range so hard, he is betting every single king now when he should be checking them all back. So because of that, our king is basically the nuts in this spot. Like we see king 8 has over 90% equity, and therefore it's worth it to jam. And we do have some air combos, and basically, um, you know, uh, every single ace high and worse is going to be a jam for us. We're going to turn every single ace high into a jam, and this is a situation where he's going to have to bluff catch a ton. He's going to have to bluff catch like a lot more queens. Actually, he still can't really bluff catch. I mean, I don't know. Probably without rounding, he needs to bluff catch a bit more of his queens, but he still can fold all of his aces. So basically, this is showing like why jamming in this situation against the population is kind of just the unexploitable player. It's gonna make him indifferent to calling with a ton of his hands, and the only real snap call that he has in this situation is going to be pocket queens. And so it's against a thinking player, it's an amazing way to put people under a lot of pressure. Now, obviously, this is the minimal exploitative play. So in the actual hand, we found a way to, because this isn't really exploiting them. I mean, it is exploiting them in a way that, but it's only exploiting them with our entire range, like with our entire range. Like in our situation, our hand was so nutted that we could have also gone for a trap, but although like GTO wouldn't even be using a small sizing. If it wanted to trap, it would usually just go for small sizing. I mean, it would just go for a check basically, and it would still check a few combos like a straight. I guess like he's supposed to be like betting himself sometimes basically, and that's why. But this is, you know, you're probably not donking 100%. You're probably donking sometimes, but you're probably donking less than GTO, in which case he's supposed to be checking more anyways. And so, yeah, I had a pretty good idea that this is what it would turn out like if we had these situations on the turn where he basically capped his range totally. Obviously, the thing is, when he caps his range totally, you want to get value, and I realize that it can be a lot, let's say, harder to get value. And so for that, it can make sense to like, bet your value small and just bluff with a jam. And that does make sense, but that's just not how I think, because I always tend to think in terms of ranges. So I hope that makes sense now why I was thinking all in is just kind of the only sizing that made sense in this particular spot. But obviously against a fish, I do think it's totally fine to bet small. And yeah, that seems like a pretty good exploitative adjustment to like bet small with value and just jam with your bluffs, because it's honestly going to be kind of hard for them to call with much, I think. And yeah, they're pretty capped to like, they should have decent amount of sixes in their range or something weird like that. Okay, so what I actually did is I looked at the 25 big blind solution. So this was a 12 big blind solution. Here on the right, we got the 25 big blind solution. The difference is obviously going to be the pre-flop ranges. This is button's opening range. This is GTO's button opening range. Yeah, pretty standard. And our range is much wider. We have every suited hand. We've got every king in our range now. Yeah. Okay. So the reason I wanted to do this is because I wanted to see if it could explain why GTO is donking so much more at that shallow stat depth, and I think it is, because I looked at this a bit just now. So basically, firstly, we're checking to him 100%, obviously, and then, as we see, on this particular board, GTO is not going to be mixing too much in terms of sizing. It's mainly just going to be using a small bet with the majority of its range. And it's going to have a little bit of a check back range. You know, the 6 and 4 are kind of connected, and the king is definitely in our range, in big blind's range at least, right? The king definitely is in big blind's range quite a bit. We've got big blind should have every single king, and so, you know, it does want to have a bit more of a check back range than on certain boards because of that. But anyways, it's still gonna bet the vast majority. And 9-8 is actually here in this deep stack range, like a tiny amount. So, okay. Anyways, we do call, which is, yeah, like especially so deep, we don't want to, you know, just get the money in on the flop. Like when we're shallow, raising and just getting the money in wouldn't be the worst with King 8, I believe. So, where's King 8? So, yeah, raising, the EV between raising and like calling is pretty much the same, regardless of whatever you got, basically. Whereas over here, the difference between like raising and calling, it's still like pretty much the same. But as we see, like over here, like raising any larger than like a small raise is really bad. So, you know, the whole point is you don't really want to bloat the pot with such a weak king when it just doesn't achieve that much for reasons we talked about already. So anyways, we do call, and here we are on the turn on the 5, and as we see, we're supposed to have much more of a check-back range here. Or not a check-back range, but just a checking to in position range. We're just not supposed to be donking very much. We're supposed to be donking only 15% of the time, and it's always with a small sizing. Whereas over here, we were donking. Alright, we can. Fuck, how do I unlock everything? Alright. Alright, whatever. Anyways, when we were looking at that, I rebuilt the entire thing. It might take longer. Anyways, when we looked at that, we saw that, yeah, it was going to be donking, and it was even going to be using some very large sizing sometimes, like a full pot bet, because a full pot bet, you know, you've basically got that much value. And so I think one of the main reasons why GTO would be donking so much when we're shallower over here is because you're not going to miss out on any value by donking. I mean, GTO is always thinking how to get value. And so at this shallow stack depth, you can donk and then you can jam on the river very easily, and you can still get some value from hands that you want to call, or you put hands in very tough spots. So for example, here, let's say you're donking full pot, he has to fold, you know, some sevens, which is, you know, not good for him. He has to be folding these sevens, even though like a 7 is an open-ender, he probably really doesn't want to fold it. Same with, let's say you're donking a small number like half pot. Here, sevens are now basically indifferent and to calling or not. So, you know, you're getting value from like all those worse kings. You're getting kind of some value from like maybe a6 as well, and all those underpairs here. So you're going to get value from those, and you probably would also get them value from these anyways. But the thing is, over here you're getting max value. So, you know, over here he has to get the money in with like half of his tens and jacks and queens, basically. Which ones he does get in? It looks like it would rather get the money in without a spade, since, like, if he doesn't have a spade, then you've got more bluffs in your range, but that's kind of a small thing. But otherwise it would just fold. But yeah, anyways, the thing is, like, if you donk here, you might have to end up putting in like a massive overbet shove on the river or something. And so it's going to be like, you can't really stack him over here when you donk, unless he raises your donk or something, which probably isn't going to happen that much. So you end up basically checking way more of your range, just because of that. So when we're here, we can donk, and then we can always jam on the river, basically. And I thought we wouldn't need to donk because we're going to be able to jam on the river anyways, but actually by donking, we get way more value, because if we, as we saw, if we check and he ends up checking back, his range is usually going to be so capped that, like, if you do just, jam, well, actually, it's not that great. Like, he's going to have to fold a shit ton anyway. So it does really make the most sense to be donking at this shallow stack depth now. To have a donking range, it's how we get the most value. So that really makes quite a bit of sense to me. Now looking at this deeper stack depth, and I think it explains quite a lot. Also, if we look at villains or in positions barreling range here, he should be barreling like not a bad amount, right? So here, as we see, this guy is barreling all kings, but that's because we had such a wide donking range. So I think this is also important to remember. Like, if someone is never donking in these spots at those stack depth, then you basically shouldn't be barreling. You should be protecting your entire range. I really like that. But again, this guy had like, no, what am I doing? Sorry. Yeah, we're just gonna make him check entire range. Like, once again, if he's checking, he should be checking entire range. And here, the guy's pretty much already checking entire range, although, I mean, I don't, like, it's going to make a small difference if we make him check entire range. But basically, here, we're still going to be barreling, I mean, in position, we'll still be barreling some, like, king X's. It's even going to barrel, like, pocket 8s, pocket 7s at a little frequency, and it won't worry too much about protection betting. I'm kind of curious maybe what happens if it does do this. Yeah, but the short stacked strategy here is to check back pretty much its entire range. And the deep stack strategy, I think it's going to be barreling at some frequency still, because out of position shouldn't be donking. And since we're so deep, we're kind of interested in still, like, protecting a lot of our hands. And, like, it's very unlikely that someone's gonna overbet jam in this scenario where we are so deep, basically, right? So because we're so deep, yeah, as we see, he actually ends up betting even more, just for protection. Or, like, not more, but let's say more polar. And yeah, so he's still gonna barrel quite a high frequency, or not really high, but a third of the time still. Mainly because a lot of his hands do need some sort of protection. Notice how it's still checking back a ton with hands such as, King 10, King 9, and, Pocket Queens was already in its check back range on the flop, which probably isn't too realistic for everyone, but yeah, still checking back a decent amount of king x's, but definitely betting a lot more than over here, as we see. And let's see if anything interesting happens on the river when it goes check, check. So on the river, there's going to be a small amount of overbet shoving for like 4x the pot, but 4 or 5x the pot even. But it's going to be very small amount because his range isn't too capped. I guess he's still going to be able to call with most of the king x's. Yeah. However, you know, if they do cap their range, I wouldn't be surprised for there to be way more overbetting on the river, even like 4x in the pot. But otherwise, the standard sizing to go would be about half pot. His range shouldn't be too capped, and so we want to bet our entire like king x range. I didn't even include a block bet. I think block betting here does make quite a bit of sense. It would be pretty interesting here to see what happens if this guy is, you know, barreling all of his kings, like the previous guy. Or maybe not all his kings, but let's say pocket kings, like that. And he's still bluffing, right? Like, he's still bluffing ace-7. Let's just make him bluff ace-7 always. Pocket 3s always. Like, he's still got a decent bluffing range. So here he's just barreling more than he should in general, but it's going to cap his check-back range so much. I would not be super surprised to see a lot more 4x jamming on the river because of how much this in-position player capped himself on the turn. And, you know, over here, it is kind of intuitive to just be jamming on the river because it's not a big overbet. It's like 1.25x the pot or 1.5x the pot. Over here, the situation would end up where you're pretty much overbet shoving 4x the pot. That's very unintuitive. And I wonder what the result will be. But let's wait for this to calculate. I'll pop. Okay, so we're back. As we see here, he's barreling every single king x. So he's basically barreling every top pair and better now. So his range on the river should be extremely capped. So, so he checks back here. And yeah, okay, this is nice. As we see now, because he checked back and he capped his range so much, we can start jamming all of our kings for value again. Like king 8 has 95% equity against his entire range. King 7 is maybe better to check call, but we basically don't even have a block betting range anymore. We're basically just gonna jam. Like, and you're not jamming, you're jamming all your air. You're jamming your entire air range, as we see. We're jamming like 4x pot here. This is something I've studied before, but it's the most effective way to play our range. And so because I studied this spot before, I was thinking this would be kind of similar, like at the shallow stack depth. But the shallow stack depth kind of, it was a bit new. But yeah, as we see, a 4x pot overbet shove here on the river would be the most effective strategy, simply because of the way that Villain capped his range by barreling much too much with every single king. And so, yeah, basically every single ace high and pure air would be jamming. We generate the most fold equity that way, and it allows us to put in more bluffs because he needs to call much less profitably. And then our kings have so much value, as we noticed. Like, just a naked top pair, like any king, just king 2, he has no more kings in his range. Like, he doesn't have anything that beats us apart from like queen 6 maybe, because he capped his range so hard that we basically have the nuts with every king. And so every single king is entitled to just jam 4x pot for value. And so that would be our value range, like top pair and better would be a jam. And it's actually what's really funny is, you can even jam like queen 6 for, okay, well, queen 6 is a 2 pair, but you can even jam like 10-6 here. And it looks like it's a value bet here. Well, I don't know why a6 is checking, but yeah. Oh, sorry. You can even jam queens. Sorry, six is our third pairs. I'm sorry. Queen X's are going to be your second pairs, and even queens, they have 85% equity. Like, it's not going to be like a huge mistake to jam. If we look at Queen 10 here, you can bet, mm, the difference between just jamming and like betting pot is nothing. Like, there's no difference. So like, it's totally fine to even jam your queens for value. And I think a lot of people are missing out on these like jams. And like, basically what you're going to find is they play terribly against the strategy, but like a lot of people they do cap their range majorly. Like, even if they're bluffing enough, right? Let's say, like, I did add a few bluffs. I added some pocket threes to the bluffing range. I added some, ace 8, ace 7. I kept these jack 10, jack. Like, these aren't hands that people will always, like, bluff. So, I kept a lot of bluffs in there. I just basically capped him by making him barrel every king and better. Which is how a lot of people will play in reality, the barreling 3/4 of the pot. So if you know you're playing against someone who's capping their range and not protecting it at all, this is the proper reaction to just 4x jam the pot on the river. So yeah, this was one of the things I wanted to show in relation to this, and why you can really go overboard, and it's how you can exploit people even at deep stacks. And then it's basically like, what type of player are they? If they're like really big calling stations, because they have nothing to call. But if you see someone calling with an ace high, for example, then it's very easy for you to be very value heavy only, and basically just do it with your kings. If you see someone if you never see someone call, like, ever, then you have an amazing bluff, and you can probably underdo it with kings, and you should just keep doing it with bluffs, and you can either check with your kings or like bet small with your kings. So I think this is a pretty interesting spot for, sort of max exploits, which people don't use too much. Obviously, remember not to do this against fish and only against regs, because fish, like, I think bluffing against fish would be quite terrible, but against regs, I think this makes a lot of sense. And yeah, so maybe if you want to look into that yourself or go into some more details, you could look into it yourself to try and understand exactly why it's doing this, because I know it's kind of a tough concept, which took me a while to understand, but yeah, 4x overbet pot jams make a lot of sense in this spot. So I guess that will be it for this video. I will continue going through a couple of the other marked hands which I found interesting, so that will just be one of them. And thanks for watching.